Usually I explore stamps on envelopes or covers on this channel, but this time I've got something a little different. It's a large old document from the 1700s that a viewer sent to me, and it has a stamp on it that is the oldest stamp that I've ever encountered, much older than the penny black. So let's explore that stamp and this document on this episode of #Flatly. This is exciting. I always feel like a historian when studying old covers, and I should, because philatelists are historians. Philatelists are historians with a specialty in 1840 and above, but of course could study postal history long before the first postage stamp. Well, here is an instance where we get to look at an item that is not postal at all. It wasn't intended to go through the mail or have anything to do with the postal service. This is a document from the UK, a contract between two people, and we will see in many ways that the stamp in this document is the ancestral beginnings of the first postage stamp. Now, before unfolding the document, we can see that this is from 1786, the 6th day of September to be exact. And as I mentioned, this is a contract between two people, John Freeman and Francis Freeman, perhaps related to each other. Now, as I begin to unfold the document, we have to talk about what it's made of, because this predates wood pulp paper that we are used to today. In the 1700s, there were different sources for paper, including hemp and flax, and this is neither of those. This is vellum, which is very much like parchment. Parchment is animal skin or membrane that is stretched out and treated to become a thin writing surface. Vellum is the same thing, but it's specifically calf skin. You can actually see the grainy texture of the skin right over here. Vellum has finer grain than parchment due to the age of the animal. So if you see very fine grain such as this, you'll know that it's calf skin, vellum, versus the older animals, you'll see the larger grain, and that'll be parchment. Even though paper was widely available in the 1700s, legal documents such as this will be made out of parchment or vellum because of tradition, and as we'll see, they can last a very long time. And because this is a tough material, it's not easily torn and can be unfolded with minimal risk of damaging, but you should still be cautious as you do it. So the first thing I can tell you is that the one side is very smooth and shiny, whereas the side or the surface with the writing on it is a lot more coarse. It's been clearly treated, perhaps even washed with a stone, to prepare it for holding the ink. But this handwriting is just beautiful. And look at it, it's basically a font. And actually, when I go looking through the various fonts, or you go into Google Fonts, you can find a few fonts that come close to this particular style. Actually, at first thought it was Old English, but this is a lot more chill and a little less medieval. When just taking one of the words, for instance, further, and comparing it to the other fonts on Google Font, I get really close with New Old English. It's got the same little thing over here with the T and this weird curvy tail on the H. I know, I'm going down a rabbit hole here, but this writing is actually a combination of print and script, or cursive script. It's readable. I'm not doing too bad of a job figuring out what it's all about. Notice the bolding of important phrases, the fancy capitalized letters. It's really something to admire on its own. This was likely to have been prepared by a stationer at the time who would have semi-completed this document, including the writing, which consists of your standard legal statements and content. And they would have left parts open to be filled in with the specific details of this agreement. You could still see the ruled lines on the paper to keep the writing in line. And if you look carefully, you'll see small pinpricks along the sides of the vellum. This was done by a tool that then allowed the stationer to draw the lines between the pinholes with uniform spacing. Also note the double red margin on the left here. It's something that still exists today. And I always thought that the red line margin was there to create a space for teachers to write angry comments about your assignment. But no, it serves so many more purposes. In this case, we can see it being used to house the star of the episode, a beautiful embossed revenue stamp, which we will get to shortly. Also, one thing I want to point out is the presence of errors and mistakes. Well, really, it's corrected errors and mistakes. It almost looks as if the writers actually used whiteout or Tipp-Ex to brush over a word or an entire sentence and then write over it. And it's not Tipp-Ex or whiteout or any kind of correction fluid. It's just really using a knife to scratch off what was previously written there and then write over it again. These documents were expensive and also time-consuming to create, so you wouldn't exactly just crumble up the paper and throw it away. You would have to scratch off errors and correct as needed, which just adds to this being such a cool item to examine and explore. This document is an indenture. I know this because of the first two words. This indenture. But what exactly is an indenture? Indenture is a term that originated in England and is a legal and binding contract usually associated with bond agreements or real estate, for example. You may be familiar with the term indentured servant, an arrangement where someone agrees to work without pay until eventual compensation, an apprentice of sorts. Well, this is a different kind of indenture between two people that are actually exchanging money for land. One of the cool things about this indenture, besides it being over 230 years old, is that it's only one half of the full document. You'll notice this unique and deliberately jagged cut that runs along the top, and this is what makes it an indentured document. There was actually another copy of this produced at the very same time, using the same piece of vellum, but uniquely cut in a way that produced a two-piece puzzle. Each of the two participants in this agreement took one of those copies, each one bearing the terms of the agreement and the appropriate signatures. So if there ever was a dispute or a need to update or review the contract, you would bring the two halves together and just mash them along the cut, just to confirm that you have indeed the same contract under review. Now, this particular indenture was between a father and son. Francis Freeman was the oldest son and heir to John Freeman. This document is a record of John Freeman handing over a portion of land and buildings to his son, Francis, for the sum of £1,800 sterling. Today, that's roughly 280 or 290,000 pounds, almost 400,000 US dollars. And the property is in the parish of Castle Frome in the county of Herefordshire in the West Midlands of England. But enough about this document. Let's start talking about this stamp. It's a revenue stamp, proof that the stamp duty or tax was paid for this contract. The concept of governments taxing contracts, tenancy agreements, wills, and other legal documents came into existence in the 1600s. In order to make this document legally effective, you had to pay the appropriate taxes, and in doing so, you got a stamp on the document, which proved that you paid your taxes and that the document was now legally effective. But what was the purpose of the tax? Well, it was a way of financing things, wars. Actually, the British Parliament first introduced these stamp duties in 1694 as a temporary way to finance William III's wars against France. And the concept was so successful that it stuck around long after William III. It is an amazing piece of history, perhaps because it is simple, elegant, while being quite complex at the same time. You see, it is an embossed stamp, meaning that it stands out in relief. Its design is an impression that you can feel, and it has multiple components to it that come together and are assembled into a revenue stamp at the time of being applied to this indenture. So let's take a closer look. The stamp is a uniform dark blue rectangle measuring 40 by 45 millimeters, and the design features a shield with the English or Tudor rose in the middle, the heraldic emblem of England with the crown, and the words Honi soit qui mal y pense, French for shame on him who thinks evil of it, a motto that still appears on the royal coat of arms of the United Kingdom. The tax amount has been written out several times on the stamp, and this is a bit confusing. 1 shilling and 6 pence, 6 pence, 6 pence, 6 pence. The stamp is actually 6 shillings. This is considered to be a compound stamp. Each time there were increases in tax rates, they would individually be listed on a compound stamp, providing a breakdown of tax rate increases the way that tax increases were expressed in parliamentary acts. Prior to 1757, they just used multiple stamps on a document. After 1757, they used these compound stamps to sum it all up. So with these British embossed revenue stamps, you may need to do a bit of math to figure out what the stamp duty was. On the very back of the stamp and the document, there is a royal cipher stamp. Another small rectangular piece of paper measuring 22 by 23 millimeters and displaying the royal cipher of King George III. A royal cipher is essentially a monogram of a country's reigning sovereign. In this case, the G is for George and the R is for Rex, Latin for king. Notice the 3 at the base of the crown for George III. Oh, and I'm totally sure that you've noticed this little shiny silver square, a very interesting feature of this stamp. The design and construct of this stamp is quite clever, and you have to think about it for a bit. How would you prove that a document had its taxes paid? You could try emboss the document directly, but this is vellum, it's animal skin. It'll resist the embossing, or it'll just relax over time and eventually you won't see it anymore. Also, things don't adhere or stick to vellum very easily, whether it's glues, adhesives, or even wax. And we can see that with John Freeman's wax seal. It's actually not on the document, but on a piece of cord or material that you can see when I flip it over to the other side. In order to place John Freeman's wax seal on this indenture, 2 slits were cut with the cord or material fastened through it, and then the wax seal applied to that. And it worked. It's still here after 230 years. I think it's actually a bird. Maybe it's a dove in an olive branch. I don't know, it's pretty neat. But it would not have been here if it was applied directly to the vellum. It would have fallen off over a period of time. Also, keep in mind, from the perspective of the government, is that you would not only want to prove that this document had its taxes paid for, you would want to prevent any forgery or the ability to remove some signature that this particular contract had its taxes paid for and have it applied to some other document just to cheat the system. So whatever proof you place on this document mustn't easily be replicated or removed and placed elsewhere. And this little silver square was an important part of keeping the stamp on the contract. So let's do a quick demo on how all these components came together to form an embossed revenue stamp. A revenue stamp would actually start off looking like this. Just a rectangular blue piece of standard paper. There's no markings on it, it's plain, and it has not yet been embossed. Now, it first gets glued to the parchment paper. 2 slits would be cut through the revenue stamp paper as well as the parchment paper. And from there, a thin piece of silver foil will be inserted through the strips. And on the back, it would be folded over and connected. Now, all of this together would be embossed. And then on the back, I would glue my royal cipher. So this was just my lame attempt at trying to show you how it would be assembled. They placed the piece of paper first on the vellum with adhesive, cut the slits, added the foil band or strip through those slits, connected them at the back, then did the embossing, and then attached the royal cipher on the back. And this whole process could take under a minute to complete. Now let's get back to the real embossed revenue stamp. which when I turn over the document to the other side and we look at the royal cipher, you can still see the impression of the embossing on the vellum. It's very faint, but it's definitely there. And when I flip the document back over to the main side, we can see that that foil strip is very much a part of this embossed stamp. It holds the impressions beautifully, just clipping a rose petal, and we can see the two slits that the strip was thread through. If you were to try and remove the revenue stamp, you would likely ruin it, along with the cipher. You could even potentially ruin or scar the document itself, and if you did successfully remove it, it would appear out of place on any document you attach it to. This stamp and document are very much the same entity, and the same can be argued for any postal cover that has a stamp and the scars and markings of its postal journey. It's the same thing, except this is just a document from 1786. This entire thing, the combination of its components and the important information that it held, was designed to stand the test of time. All of it, from the material that it was written on, to the wax seal on the material band, the stamp with all its components, even the way it was folded inward to preserve its contents, this document could have been assembled a couple of years ago, yet here it is over 230 years later. And I'm sure that most of you have seen a book or document that is in terrible condition, but was printed on or created during your lifetime. So this is nothing short of impressive. I get excited about stuff like this. The embossed revenue, as well as the royal cipher stamp, all predate postage stamps. The penny black only came into existence in 1840, 54 years after these very stamps have been applied to this document. And if you look at the royal cipher stamp, it's very similar in size to the penny black, also featuring the image of royalty. Not the profile, of course, but still the image of the reigning monarch on a similar sized piece of paper. Definitely a related ancestor to the postage stamp. Embossed revenues can be collected in really one of two different ways. Either affixed to a large document such as this, or cut out a small piece of parchment with the stamp affixed, ideally with the foil strip and the cipher stamp on the back. Collecting them as a large document is a bit difficult because of the sheer size that it takes up, as well as the fact that you can't really showcase it or view it easily without having to unfold it. But it does have the most value, though many collectors prefer to collect them cut out, and understandably so. But if you come across a stamp attached to a document, do not cut it out. Leave it as is. There is so much to learn and appreciate from the full item. Now, one last thing that is important is to just realize that this concept of a revenue stamp on documents was not a big hit in the American colonies when the British tried to introduce them. The American colonies had a bit of a fit. The exact same concept was introduced to American colonies in 1765 as the Stamp Act, where the British Parliament sought to tax all paper documents. The Americans did not like it and repelled it. This Stamp Act is credited with increasing tensions between the colonists and the United Kingdom that later involved a tea party, a declaration, a bit of a fight, and the independence of the United States. So these are an important part of world history. This document was signed 3 years after the end of the Revolutionary War. And this royal cipher on the back is of King George III, who was the last king of America. Just wow. This is the first time I've explored anything quite like this. And I want to thank a viewer in Florida, Randy, for sending this my way. This was super cool, Randy. Thoroughly enjoyed exploring it. And again, I learned a lot. I also want to thank Richard Morrell, curator of the British Library's Philatelic Collections and embossed revenue stamp enthusiast, who supported me with a number of details that I was able to incorporate into my research and script. Thank you so much. And I will leave a number of links in the video description for you to check out and explore. If you've enjoyed this video, please hit the like button, as well as make sure that you are subscribed, and leave a comment below. What is the oldest stamp that you have? Do you collect embossed revenue stamps? And do you have any other topics for me to explore? Let me know. As always, thank you so much for watching, and happy exploring.